Okay, lesson 5 is going to be on painting. So far in Photoshop, we have made images from other images. We've composited things together and edited their appearance. Now, Photoshop is a raster creation program. That means we can create raster images in it. So we're going to do what's a pretty standard, simple drawing exercise, like what you do in paper or paint and like a traditional medium class here in Photoshop, so we can look at some of the ways that painting in particular is replicated in this program. So we are going to make a ball, and we're going to make a table layer, and we're going to make this background layer to create our kind of standard composition based on a photo reference right here. So we're going to look at the document creation window, how you actually make a document. We're going to talk a little bit about resolutions, like how many pixels do you need and what does that even mean. We'll look at the mixer brush and how it emulates traditional acrylic and oil painting. And then we'll create the painting that we'll look at some of the advantages of working in Photoshop versus in traditional mediums. All right, something else to note when we are drawing and painting in Photoshop is that we've got 4 options. A lot of you probably have the worst option accessible to you right now, which is a trackpad on a laptop, and trackpads are going to be pretty tough for this chapter and this kind of work. Now, some artists and professionals will use a mouse. Most artists and professionals will use a combination of a mouse with one of these 2 ones over here, which is going to be a tablet and a pen tablet display. And the big difference here between like my mouse and one of these pen tablets displays, because they're both just controlling the cursor, is the access to one of these pens. And these pens allow you to, for like on the cheap end, control just pressures. Like depending on how hard I'm pressing down, the brush will do something different. So like I can taper my lines. A thin to thick line is really nice to be able to draw when drawing and painting or working in 3D modeling or a lot of other digital applications. Some of these fancier ones will also kind of keep track of like how much your thing is tilted, what direction you're going, and will change the way brushes will behave based on those controls. Now this one is just basically like a trackpad that you would run your finger on, except it also has this brush. Often it will pen. It will often have buttons going across the top or side, giving you additional controls for commonly used features. And then there's one that's basically a secondary display with all the same features as the previous one, but that secondary display can be drawn directly on. Now this pen tablet display is pretty different from like something like an iPad with an Apple Pen. The big difference being that the iPad and Apple Pen are still going to run mobile operating systems versus a desktop operating system that will, run like Photoshop. So like instead of running Photoshop on an iPad, you probably actually run something called Adobe Fresco to do your drawing and painting in. So you have access to different programs versus if you're on a computer versus if you're on an iPad. And depending on what your workflow looks like or where you're working or what kind of artist you are, it may be much more appropriate for you to work on a computer using a pen tablet display, which is for what's going to be true for a lot of people. But like if you're an independent artist, you might actually end up working pretty successfully on something like an iPad with an Apple Pen. So that'll be something that if you go into this kind of work, you'll want to kind of figure out pretty quick. And it comes down to, again, access to software and how that software behaves on a computer. Me, I really like the additional power and additional controls, particularly file management, that you're going to have on a computer versus iPad. So I invested in a nice pen tablet display rather than an iPad and Apple Pen. All right, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is make a new document. So far we have opened existing raster images rather than create a new one. So let's make one from scratch. To do that, we could hit Command-Control-N, we can come up to File New, or we can click the New File button right here in our Photoshop home screen. We get the new document window. In here will be any recent ones that you've used. I've deleted all of mine out for the sake of this tutorial. Or ones that you've saved, or like other kind of templates out through here. A quick warning about some of these templates: they'll sometimes change how the Photoshop interface works or looks a little bit. So as you move through these or you try any of them out, just be aware that some goofiness can show up when you use them. For now, we'll just stick with this default one, and then we're going to come over and change some settings. Where it says Untitled 1, we're going to put in our intended file saved document name. It's like, what do we want to call this on our computer? Why don't we do Chapter 5 Painting, or give it your own descriptive name, as long as it kind of tells you what it is. And we will come over to where it says inches, and we want to make sure it says inches, and we want to do 14 for our width and height for 11. Now here we can switch between portrait and landscape if we wanted to. We'll stick with landscape. We also have ability to turn this into an artboard. So like if we wanted more than one canvas, or what would become an artboard in our document, so we can have multiple images in there. Or like if we wanted to be able to have stuff kind of floating off in our workspace off to the side while we're working through it, we would switch to artboards. Artboards tend to slow Photoshop down, so I tend not to use them in this program. They work really well, and they're the default for Illustrator, and they work great in that. Then we have resolution, and resolution is easy, 300. If you want to be able to print it. So like if you print something, you want to print it at a resolution of 300, or like what that would mean is that each square inch of your image has 300 pixels in it. So like if we come up to where it says inches and we switch to pixels, we can see that at 11 by 14, we have 4200 by 3300 pixels in our image. And if we are in pixels, we can actually change this resolution to be whatever we want. Just know that if we come back up here and we switch back to inches, we can see that it has changed my dimensions based on that resolution setting. That said, I'm going to go ahead and put back in 300, and let's do 14 by 11. Moving down, we want to be in RGB color. There's a bunch of color modes in here. We'll talk about them in the technical tedium chapter. Same thing with the difference between 8, 16, and 32-bit is. We're going to stick down here at the smaller one of 8-bit. And then under advanced options, go ahead and make sure it says working sRGB. And if it doesn't, go ahead and come down and pick sRGB, blah, 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 blah. And what we're doing is I'm trying to set this up to be high enough resolution that we could make an 11 by 14 print. We're keeping some of these other settings a little bit smaller for people's computers that might struggle a little bit with a larger document. And we'll go ahead and click Create. Next, we want to switch our workspace. So right now it's set up for kind of general use, which is good, but we can change it a little bit for painting, and then we can change it further to really have it set up for what we're doing today. So up in the top right, I'm going to click the workspace button, and I'm going to pick painting. Notice that my panel layout changes. Notice that my tool layout over here changes a little bit. And we're going to further modify our panel layout. But so far all it's done is just it's moved stuff around a little bit. So like tools that we don't use very often will have gotten nested down here under these 3 dots. And like you just don't use these very much in painting, so that's why they kind of went away. All right, over here on the right, let's drag properties and info over into the top right panel set. And brushes and oh wait, did they change this? Reset painting. Oh no, look at that. It saved the changes I made, some of them, from when I reset. Interesting. When I reset my preferences, it didn't reset my workspace. Well, all right, let's customize this anyway. So I'm going to grab history, and I'm going to toss this over here with swatches, navigator, and so on. Brush settings can stay here. I don't need clone source. I don't need tool presets. I don't need libraries. Libraries are cool, by the way. So like when I have it on my own system running, I'll have like my artist signature and stuff in here. And that way I can just click and drag it in rather than having to go up to file, placed, embedded, and so on. And then it's also on any computer that I have my library set to sync to the Creative Cloud. I can use it between all my different computers as well. It's really handy. But we don't need it today. So I'm going to click close. Brushes, I want to nest over here with brush settings, and well, not nest. I want to have it as in part of the column, so I'll drag it down to the bottom so that blue line appears. And then I'll mouse over the in-between line and drag up, so I've got it nice and split up right here. Next, let's add in one panel because we don't have our color panel. So I'm going to go to Window, and I'm going to go to Color. And like the Hue Cube and the Hue Cube's okay. I like the color wheel a little bit better. So I'm going to come up to the top, and I'll click these lines. And I will pick color wheel. One note about the color wheel when we're looking at it in Photoshop is that many of you who have taken other art classes might be familiar with color mixing and color theory from red, blue, yellow, which is kind of the primary painter model. In Photoshop, we're in red, green, blue, RGB, rather than red, blue, yellow. So our color wheel is in a different layout than what we're used to from red, blue, yellow painting. And what that does is it actually gives us another color right here called cyan, which is cool, but like it just means like if you were used to thinking in those kind of color theories, this wheel won't kind of line up with that kind of color theory. And to get that in here, you actually have to kind of install an add-on or a mod into Photoshop to get it to work that way, because it wants to be in RGB, it doesn't want to be in red, blue, yellow. So just be aware of that if you're like coming from traditional arts. Okay, now that we have our workspace set up, let's take a closer look at what the mixer brush actually does. So let's make an empty layer to work in. So I'm going to come over to my layers panel, and I'll make a new layer. Boop. And I'm just going to get black. If black isn't already active, you can just click and drag down to the bottom of this, or you can take this brightness slider and drag it all the way over to the right, left. And let's grab the mixer brush. And there's a bunch of different brushes in here. So like we'll actually take a look at the pencil and the regular brush tool next chapter. For now, we're going to putz around with the mixer brush. And the mixer brush emulates oil and acrylic painting in real life. When we have it active, we've got a nice robust toolbar up here that we're going to putz with a lot. We have a drop down that's basically the brushes panels combined over here. We've got a button to open both of them. And then we have a preview right here of what's on our brush tip. So like if we're Bob Ross, what paint is on my brush is what I will see in this box. Like if I'm working and I have clean off and I got to turn on something. Let me see. We can see that it starts picking up white into that space. Let's turn this one back on. Next to it, we have a little drop down for load and clean brush. That's also what these are. So like this one's load and this one's clean. And an easy way to think about these again is to think about Bob Ross. This first one is like I've got, I'm Bob Ross. I've got a palette in my hand. I'm standing in front of my canvas and I've got my 2-inch brush. And I'm painting some little trees or bushes. And when I pick up my brush, do I go back and pick up more paint off of my palette or do I go back to painting? So like he picks up his brush. Right now with how it's set up, his brush would come back to his palette. He would pick up some more paint and then put paint on there, pick up more paint, and so on. If I turn this off, every time he picks up his brush, he does not go back and get more paint. Similarly, this other one right here is clean brush. So like when he picks his brush up, does he dip it into that paint thinner and beat the devil out of it? So when it's on, every time he picks up his brush, every time you release your mouse, you dip it into the paint thinner and beat the devil out of it to get the paint off of it. So how it's set up currently right now is that he would lift up his brush, he'd clean it, and then pick up a new thing of paint. If I turn this one off, he just cleans his brush. If I turn this one off, he doesn't do anything. He doesn't pick up more paint. He doesn't beat the devil out of it. And if I have this one on, he just picks up new paint. For now, we're going to turn both of these on. Then we have a drop down right here that controls these sliders over yonder. These sliders over yonder kind of emulate what version or what you're doing in painting. So like what does each one of them do? So like we've got wet, which controls how much paint will be taken from the canvas, similar to like how wet the canvas would be in real life. So again, think about Bob Ross. He often puts down liquid white onto his canvas when he's painting, and depending on how much liquid white he puts down, or if he let the paint canvas dry overnight, will change how much paint mixes while he's going along. And he likes that liquid white because it makes it easy for him to paint those skies. Load is how long the paint will last on the brush, similar to like how much paint is on the brush. Mix is going to be the ratio of canvas to load paint when they mix together. So like an easy way to think about it is the different viscosities of paint. So like a thin paint won't mix, will sit on top of a thick paint. But if you've got a thick paint on your brush and you've got a thin paint on your canvas, the thick paint usually overrides it. It just doesn't work very well. So like how do they mix together? Flow is the rate that the paint is applied, also controls the maximum opacity that can be applied by a single stroke. So like, do you want to apply like a lower opacity version of what you're doing? The spray button right here is like having a rattle can or a spray brush. The longer you click and hold somewhere, the more paint is applied. We have a really neat thing right here that we won't use in this chapter, but can be useful in the following chapter, which is smoothing. And smoothing is exactly what it sounds like. So right now when I paint on here, this thing stays really faithful to where my mouse is going. If I turn this all the way up, we can see that it falls behind my mouse and that smooths out my stroke. So this can be a really good way to draw large shapes very cleanly. So there's another one in here that's pretty good for that called the pulled string, especially if I'm trying to draw like a square or something like that, but I don't want a perfect square, so I won't use the hotkey for that. How this one works is I click and I start dragging, I get this pink square, and when I hit the edge of that pink square, it then follows along with the brush. So this is also another good method to get nice, clean, smooth lines. I'm going to turn that back off. Finally, we have angle. This won't apply for us today, but some of our brushes over here will be affected by the angle. We also have sample all layers. So right now, if I mark on here, I'm just getting the top layer, but if I turn this on, it mixes with the layer underneath. And then we have pressure override. So for those of us with pen tablets, this will allow us to override whatever the brush setting is and be able to do things like taper or change opacity with our pen tablet. So let's see what this actually looks like. We'll come up to custom and let's pick dry light load. And if I click and drag a stroke on here, you can see that we've run out of paint quite quickly. Versus if we come up and pick dry heavy load, we have a lot of paint on here, and it will take a very long time to run out of paint on our brush. Notice that when I go over my other lines, there's no mixing. In fact, let's make this easier to see. I'm going to grab red, and we can see that I just get a solid opaque line over that. If your brush doesn't look like mine, by the way, right click and just grab soft round or soft round hard. Either one of those is fine. Oop. Now if I come up here and I switch to very wet and I click and drag over this, we can see that it now, I have sample all layers turned on. It is now mixing with the underlying layer. And if I turn off sample all layers, it only mixes with the current layer. All right, so that's cool and all, but like, how do I blend stuff together? Let's switch our brushes. So I'm going to grab Kyle's Real Oil. So I'm going to come over to my brushes and I'll just start searching for oil. And we'll grab this first brush right here, which has a nice texture to it, which when we use it, we can see that texture gets applied to our canvas while we're drawing. I'm going to turn sample all layers back on. Now what I can do is I can empty out my brush and I could come over here and I could start manually blending this. This would take a long time. Similarly, we could do what we did last chapter where we grabbed the smudge tool and we turned on a little bit of scattering, and we could use this. Let's get a little bigger. And when I brush over it, I get that same kind of blending like what we saw with that boxing chapter when we were kind of doing his little bruise. Now, I think it's easier to do it with the mixer brush and to turn scattering on. And let's do, 35 tends to work pretty well in my opinion. And I'll pick, I like moist for this, and I will empty out my brush and I'll tell it to clean itself. And now when I go over these areas, I can start getting some very quick and easy, let's get you even a little bit bigger so it's easy for you guys to see. I can really start blending out my edges and tones using this brush. And I get this nice painterly texture in here, and I want that painterly texture because that adds to my image. I don't want to look digital, would be a good way to think about it. And this kind of prevents some of that digital appearance. Now, like, I'm not going to be able to blend very well this way using a mouse. And it's just like, that's one of the limitations of a mouse. Like, it's only going to be okay because I don't have a lot of control over how it's blending. So let's go ahead and I'm going to switch to my tablet so we can see some of that difference. Okay, the screen will look a little bit different because it's a different screen that I'm capturing right now. So this is my pen tablet display, and let's go ahead and fit this onto my, I gotta make this active first. Go ahead and fit this on my screen. And when I'm using my brush now, I will have way more control versus when I was using my other brush. So like if well here first, let's take a look at tapering. So like if I pick hard round brush, let's turn on pressure override, and I've got red running, and I make a mark. I need to load my brush first, and I make a mark. I can start by pressing lightly and then hard, and I can taper my lines, and it's much easier to get clean, smooth drawings when I'm using this. Same thing when I get ready to start blending. So if I turn scattering on, I grab Kyle's Real Oils. Let's set scattering to 35, and let's get that. Well, we can leave the green red in there. Now let's take the red out. When I start getting ready to blend, I can blend small amounts versus large amounts very quickly and easily using this blending method. Let's switch to moist. And it's much easier for me to blend versus when I'm using the mouse because I can very easily taper and modify how much blending I'm doing by how hard I am pressing down on my keyboard, on my pen tablet display. So again, if you're going to go into any sort of professional arts, you probably want to pick up some sort of pen tablet or pen tablet display because it's going to be necessary for you to be able to work well. All right, let's switch back to mouse version of Photoshop. Okay, let's get ready to do our actual drawing. First things first is we need to nuke this layer. So I'm going to go ahead and just hit delete on my keyboard with that layer active. All right, first let's add in our reference image. So let's go up to File and go to Place Embedded. And navigate to wherever your files happen to be at. In my case, they're in these kind of work files from the textbook, and I will click Place. Now I need this to be a little bit smaller, so let's go ahead and shrink it down a little bit, and I'm going to nestle it up here in the corner for me to be able to refer to while I am making my design. And when I'm looking at this is we're going to need at least 3 layers, and by separating it out into layers, I'm not like a real painter where I've got like a piece of canvas or paper in front of me. I have to meticulously try to keep everything separate on there. I can make separate layers, and those layers and then the related masks will keep everything separate for me. So we're going to make a black background, a gray area for this table that we can then shade, and then a white area for this ball that we can then also shade. So let's add in our black background first. Let's use something we haven't looked at before, which is a vector shape. So down here towards the bottom of my toolbar, I have this box. I'll click on the box. Up at the top, I'm going to make sure this fill thing has a black fill in it. Where it says stroke, I'm going to click on stroke and I'm going to pick this null or no. And then I'm ready to make my box. To make my box, I am not going to click and drag. I am simply going to click and it'll be like, yo, how big do you want it? And I'll be like 12 space IN, and I have to type in inches in this case. And I will then do 8 space IN. So I've got an 8 by 12 box that I'm adding. I want to center it in my design. So I'll hit V for Move Tool or click on it up here in the toolbar. And you should be able to click and drag it with these little pink lines to help you snap it perfectly in place. If you're not getting pink lines, come to View and turn on Snap. Another way to center it is to use these kind of quick buttons. So with the shape active, with the Move Tool active, if you come up to your tool option bar and click on the dots, and where it says Align to, pick Canvas. You can also align it by clicking Center, and it will be centered in your design. Any of those methods work. Over here in my layers panel, I'm going to drag my reference back up so I can see it again, and I'm going to label rectangle black background. Next, we are going to use this box to start a selection to make a gray box down here at the bottom. Well, really what we're doing is we're going to fill this whole thing gray and then mask out just that little section. So like what we did in chapter 2, I want to start by selecting everything that's in this layer, aka this black box. So I'm going to hold down the Command key and click on the layer preview right here, or Control if you're on Windows. We can see that it created a selection around my box. And when you're clicking, make sure you're not clicking on the eye or the layer label. You have to click on the layer thumbnail preview thing right here. And like right now, if I filled it, it would fill the whole area, but I want to fill just this lower section. So I need to remove this top 2/3 of my selection from my current selection. To do that, I'll make my marquee selection tool active, or M on your keyboard. And up here, I'm not going to use new, I'm not going to use add, I'm going to use subtract. So anything that I draw over will get removed from my selection. So I'll click past the left edge and past the top edge and drag down until about 1/3 of the area is still left on the lower part of the screen. Boop. And we can see that my selection is now just this little area down here. I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to label this table. And I'm going to click Layer Mask either in my contextual taskbar or over here in my Layers panel. Now it doesn't look like anything's happened. That's because there's nothing in this layer. It's empty. So let's go ahead and add in gray to this. I'm going to make my layer contents active. So contents, mask, content, mask, content. So click on the layer preview thumbnail and make sure your contents is active. And we want to select this whole space so we can fill it. So I'm going to go to select all or hit Command or Control A on my keyboard to get up that initial selection. We can see that this whole empty space is nice and selected. Then I'll come down to my contextual taskbar and click the paint bucket, and I'll just pick 50% gray. And now we have a gray area right here. And what we've done is that we've limited of the gray part of the layer we can see by this mask, and that means later when we are painting, it automatically hides everything in that area for us. Next, we're going to make a layer and selection for our ball. So I'm going to come up to the top left and click and hold on the regular rectangular marquee tool and switch to the elliptical marquee tool. I'm going to drop my current selection by clicking deselect. And then I'm going to double check right here where it says feather that it says 0. So remember back in chapter 3, I was like, if you leave the feathering on, this will cause you a problem. Like when we were drawing the ovals around those figures, this is where it would cause you a problem. So make sure this says 0. I'm going to mouse over roughly center and then hold down Alt Option Shift to start drawing a perfect circle. And I'm going to get one on there, and then I'm going to use space bar to move it around a little bit, maybe a little bit further down, right about there. Looks pretty good to me. I'm going to release the space bar, I'm going to release my mouse, and then I'll release my keyboard. I'll make a new layer. I'll click Layer Mask. I'll label this ball orb or whatever you want to call it. I'm going to make the layer contents active. I'm going to hit Command or Control A or select all. And I'll click the paint bucket and I will fill with white. And now let's drop our current active selection. Okay, so we don't need to do anything to the black background layer because there's no painting in there. It's just black. So then we need to do the table layer. And when we're doing the table layer, when we're looking at this ball, what we want to do is we want to try to block in some of these tones. And when we're looking at this, we have our ambient fill light, this kind of gray area around it. We have our main light source hitting right here on the table. And then we also have, and we can see it in the shadow right here, light reflecting off of the ball down onto the table. So like that's some little additional reflected light. And then we have the main shadow being cast behind our ball. So we're going to start by blocking some of these tones in. And then after we have them blocked in, we'll go back and blend them. So let's shrink you back down so you're not in the way. And you can use whatever you want to block it in. I think I'm going to grab the mixer brush. Oop, properties and info are open still. Let's get rid of you. And I'm going to grab, let me see, if you type in oil, this first one, Kyle's Real Oils, this one will work well for us. I'm going to make my layer for the table active. I'm going to make sure the contents are active, not the mask, the contents. And I'm going to use my little slider up here. I've got the B slider for brightness. And I can drag this up and down to have access to different tones. For now, I'm just going to leave it as black. And maybe I'll just do myself a little bit of favor and I'll block it in with a little bit of scattering. So I put in 35 right there. And I'm going to make my brush bigger. I'm doing this with the bracket keys. Remember, my mouse will look bigger than yours because I have a large mouse turned on, so it's easier for you guys to track it on the screen. And again, I'm just real quick, just going to block in some of this tone. I'm not really worried about blending it out yet. And doing this with the mouse is going to be not fun. It's going to be a little hard. And if I want to darken, like I'll just grab a darker color, whoop, and throw in some dark, and darken some over here. Let's get a little bit of a shadow. Let's do the white first. Let's get some nice bright color in there, and let's add in our little white area. And I don't really like the angle of that. Let's angle you up a little bit more. So I'm going to grab some of this 50% gray and kind of nudge that back up. There we go. And let's add in our shadow. And you know what? Let's turn both of these on so I'm not getting some of that darker stuff. And let's make that shadow dark, dark. Now when I'm painting in the shadow, I'm going to make it so like this is like a line so it points together. All right, after you've got it blocked in enough, what you'll do is you'll just simply turn off the color right here. And what you can do is you can come through and start blending this out a little bit. And with a mouse, again, like you're not going to get the best results in the world. Like it's going to be a little bit of a struggle. The other thing you want to keep in mind is like I like some of this texture that the brush is adding. So I don't necessarily want to blend all of that texture away. I want to keep some of that texture in here. Another easy thing to think is like wherever I see like solid continuous tone, I'm going to go ahead and just go over it a little bit because I want a little bit of texture in there. I don't want digital flatness. Like digital flatness looks unnatural when I'm working on these kind of designs. And for a mouse, like this will be fine in terms of blending, or a trackpad, heaven forbid if you're on one of those. This again will be very not fun. And this is good enough. Like it's not great, but like this is probably what most people are going to be able to get done with a mouse without really lots of practice. Using something like a tablet can get you much better results. So like, where is it? Open. And we saw that at the start with the other demo, this one. So like this was like what most people should be able to accomplish using a pen and tablet, if not even a lot better than this. Like this is very doable with a pen and tablet. This is doable enough for what we've learned about the mixer brush tool for using a using a mouse. Now you could get this even better. You could, using some of these other brushes, you could push this a little bit further. But for where we're at, just starting to learn drawing and painting, this will be just fine. Then you'll switch to your ball layer, and it's the same thing. You'll start blocking stuff in, and you will blend out what you want to do. And when I'm doing this, an easy way to think about how I want to blend this out is I'm going to draw like a little circle around where that highlight will be. And I will continue drawing little circles out, and I will continue drawing little circles out, and I will continue drawing little circles out following the shape of this orb. And that will make it much easier to sell the shape of this ball. And let's get a brighter color in here. It's starting to get a little dark, and build it back out. And let's turn you off, and let's just blend a little bit. Again, I'm not looking for magic on this. Like if you are using a mouse, this is going to be not the easiest thing in the world. And at some point you can also turn scattering off. So it's doing less of that blending. And you can keep some of that paint texture in here. To really get those lines in there. Like I'm not looking, I don't really want perfectly smooth. I want nice, I want some of this texture. I want some of those lines in there because that will help sell that this is not a digital painting. It'll make it look more, it'll look better, basically. You want to keep some of that painter texture in there from the brush. Like that's the point of the brush. All right, so get this done. Go ahead and save it as a PSD, and you will have a nice little orb painting.